So we're beginning the Upanishads today, and the just a couple comments about the Upanishads. Um, they are not the most ancient of the Hindu scriptures. So the most ancient would be the Vedas, and the Veda, and this is late in the sort of development of Hindu scriptures. So the Vedas are first. So we're doing this a little bit out of order because we're going to be reading the Rig Veda after this. Um, and this comes a little bit later. What I've gotten from the Vedas, and we'll discover this when we discuss the text, is that the Vedas are primarily interested in rituals. So a correct performance of rituals. This was done by the Brahmin class, and uh, what I would assume with the Rig Veda is that we'll be dealing with the pantheon, which we're really not dealing with. Actually, we didn't really deal with in the Houston Smith book. We really
Hmm.
didn't talk about many of the gods and goddesses, but there are a lot to discuss. So I imagine that's going to pop up a little bit more in the Rig Veda. By the time the Upanishads come, and this is like around like 1,000, or no, around 750 BC. So ancient, and I think the Rig or the Vedas start in around 1,000. So
Okay.
this is later in the tradition. The Upanishads shift, and not a little bit, but the shift away from a strong focus on the correct form of rituals, which the Vedas are about, um, and deals more with um, sort of, I guess you could say, like seekers, like you and me. So as opposed to just dealing with the Brahmanic class or the Brahmin class, it is caste. It is almost focused on anyone that is willing to sit, meditate, listen,
Hmm.
etc.
They're more
Just a couple
wisdom focused, right?
more wisdom focus. Yeah, I like the what I put in my notes about the Upanishads is more of a focus on meditation, philosophy, and consciousness,
Hmm.
which becomes a massive part. Apparently, there are about 108 Upanishads, and we're getting a sampling sort of the more classic ones.
Hmm.
And uh, the just a little bit of a word about Upanishad, obviously a Sanskrit word. Um, it has different meanings, but the basic one is connection, which, by the way, if you think about the Isha and the Katha Upanishad, which we're going to talk about today, the idea of, or the problem of separateness comes up, or duality
Sure.
at times. And so connection makes sense. But also etymologically, the upa means by, and the um, nithad, it means sit down. So it means either like more literally sitting down, or some people take it as sitting down near a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So so you have these sort of sages, as it were, that have pupils, and the pupil is sort of, as it were, sort of at their knees, hearing this instruction, um, etc.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, um,
And
so
these are
yeah, it
all.
would have been maybe nice to do it in order, but it's okay.
Oh,
We'll
you mean the
place it
Vedas
there.
first?
Yeah, the Vedas first, and then, but that was my own mistake, not realizing that I flipped them.
It's okay. And these are all written by like different people. We don't even know the original authors of the
Correct.
individuals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I think it would be similar to the Old Testament,
Hmm. Hmm.
where it's sort of like you've got a mess of ancient texts. Yes, some of them have names attached to them, but
Right.
did Moses really write the end of Deuteronomy about his own death? Right?
Right.
Probably not. Uh, so yeah, lost in the mists of time there. So the Isha is
Hmm.
the first. The Isha, it's actually Isha Vasya is the full name, Isha Vasya,
Ishavasya.
which, yeah, which the title means the Lord is river.
Oh, interesting.
And the Lord does obviously pop up, um, or the term Lord pops up in this Isha. It is a classic one. It is one of the shortest ones as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
What, all of 18 lines, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. I think, we have a little introduction before the actual
Hmm.
verses, and well, a couple things are interesting. I think, one, it says that this one is like, if you needed to only have one
Yeah.
Upanishad, one scripture to
Yeah.
like read, this is the one,
Hmm.
and you only
Hmm.
need the first verse of it, and Hinduism
Yeah.
would still exist. So I
Yeah.
think that's
Which is
really
which is
interesting.
wild.
Yeah, and then also this is more of a
Well,
linguistic
real
thing,
quickly,
but yeah, I'll go
real
for it.
quickly, the Lord, those two lines are the Lord is enshrined in the hearts of all. The Lord is
Hmm.
the supreme reality. The first two lines.
Yep, yep, and it,
Oh,
and
oh
it,
no, no, maybe also rejoice in him through renunciation, right?
yeah, yeah, because it also
Yeah.
compares it to what Gandhi had in his mind when he was talking about
Summarize.
like summarizing it in 3 words: renounce
Hmm.
and enjoy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that kind of
Exactly.
fits that first verse.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to mention is this is more of a linguistic thing, but in this introduction, it references it as the Ishopanishad. So it's using the
Hmm.
name of Isha, but then combining it with Panishad. Um,
Oh,
so
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Where is that?
In the
What
introduction in that
page?
first paragraph, yeah, 53. Um,
Okay.
and if only the verse in the Ishopanishad were left in
Ah,
memory of the
got it.
Hindus, Hinduism would live forever.
Yeah.
So I thought
No,
that was
that's
interesting
interesting.
that that's how they combine it.
It's like the Lord Upanishad.
Was Nashad Lord? Is that what you said?
The actually no, 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 I'm sorry, the Isha.
Isha. Isha means
Oh,
Lord
actually, I'm actually
or
not
river.
sure. I'm actually not sure.
Okay, okay.
No, all I know is that it's Isha Vasya.
Isha
So
Vasya. Uh-huh.
one is Lord, one is river.
And then Upanishad was
Upanishad is like either like at etymological, like sit down by, upa by,
mm-hmm.
nisad, sit down, and then loosely sitting down near a teacher or connection,
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
right?
Hmm.
Which the connection would make sense because what we're finding here is that the greatest obstacle to self-realization is separateness,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
The or the illusion of separateness. Um, so that's yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's work through the Isha.
Sure.
Um,
Um, yeah, I mean, so we saw the first verse, but we'll just read it in full, I guess. We
yeah,
have
sure.
the Lord is enshrined in the hearts of all. The Lord is the supreme reality. Rejoice in him through renunciation. Covet nothing. All belongs to the Lord.
So yeah, this, you know, from what we've gotten from Hinduism thus far, is is the idea that there is Brahman,
Hmm.
which would be sort of like uh, you know, let's say infinite consciousness slash God,
Hmm.
but that being is in everything. You know,
Yeah.
so the and I would imagine too, because we'll get to we'll get to this with I know within within various theories of reincarnation
Hmm.
that includes all forms of sentient life.
Hmm.
So my running joke about your house is you've got a little like mini zoo working. So that would include actually the beings of your pets.
Hmm.
It's just that they're along a different process of evolution, spiritual evolution than you are,
Right.
you know. So that would be really. Which, by the way, as an aside, I've been thinking about this recently. That you know, well, I'll give you some context. Uh, Polly and I are reading a book called "The History of Nearly Everything" by Bill Bryson,
Mm,
and he start he well, it's a history of nearly everything, right? So he starts with the Big Bang, and then he starts, and then he gets into sort of the depths of astronomy and deep space and all of the current science related to it. And I just had this thought. I mean, it's so obvious a thought, but I had this thought of I was like, if and let's just take like the Christian story. If the Christian story, given assuming the Christian story is correct, why is it the case that there's all this extra space out there, all these other stars, other planets, possibly other intelligent life, and yet the focus is on this one particular planet in terms of the salvation of this race, right?
sure.
Why have everything else out there?
Hmm.
And my point is, and I think I was actually connecting that to like the pets comment that it seems like a I don't even want to just say like a religious theory, but a robust explanation of the meaning of it all, right?
Hmm.
A full philosophy of life would actually cover things like this. In other words, like would cover, this is going to be a little bit weird, but would cover like why it is the case that there's so much space in space and all of these other planetary systems and all of these other stars. How do they work into a full meaning or a full degree of life,
Hmm.
or if you will, animal, right? Non-human animals, like how did they work into? I mean, they're here. They have their own interests. There are many of them. Are they just mortal? Are they just mortal beings that exist for a period of time and then plop, they're gone? Like it's my point is one of the attractive things about something like reincarnation is that it covers them
Mm, mm, they're
in
included
their
in,
in the
yeah.
explanation, as opposed to other theories where it's sort of like, yeah, I'm not really sure, that those were created. They have a temporary function,
Hmm.
and therefore, I guess in their own lives, a temporary meaning, but it's essentially nihilistic from their perspective if it is just sort of like, you know, simple mortality. Whereas with a
Right.
reincarnation view, they're included in the explanation, and it seems more satisfying, right?
Hmm.
Intellectually, that they are on a quest as well. It's just that they're lower down the spiritual evolution
Hmm.
a than a human being. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? There's
Yeah.
something I've just been thinking more and more. Like I feel like the better explanation is the explanation that includes as much as possible about
Hmm.
what's out there in the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't like, I guess to just kind of pick at that a little bit, I feel like if you're comparing like the Christian perspective, like creatures of the earth have a purpose to serve
Hmm.
humanity, right?
Yeah.
Like you butcher the animals, you eat them, they give you
Right.
milk. What like they're
Hmm.
there to support the people. Um,
Sure.
so I guess they're
So that
kind of
no, you're
included
right.
in that sense, but
Yeah.
it doesn't include things outside of Earth. Like it's a very
No.
Earth-centric philosophy.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
so yeah, it
And
you
and
know
it's and
it.
it's and the question is why all the other stuff? Why not just like if you think about the old sort of medieval view of the universe. It was geocentric, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So it was like everything was sort of centered on and about the Earth, and obviously they had limitations about knowing what's out beyond, right?
Hmm.
So, so it's like, and I think it was something along the lines of like there's Earth, an atmosphere, ether, and then heaven, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's closed. It's why not that as opposed to a a planet among millions, billions that is actually on the edge of a galaxy,
Hmm.
and that's just, and then you continue to pull out, and then it's just right after you continue to pull out, you start to see stars, but then you continue to pull out further, it's just galaxy, 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 galaxy,
Yeah.
galaxy, galaxy, galaxy. So what's all that needed for? Right?
Hmm.
Is it
Hmm.
just no, when I was talking to Colleen about this, she was like, well, maybe it forms some type of equilibrium. So by having all of these things in place,
Mm.
it's able to create equilibrium for the drama that plays out on Earth,
Sure. Yeah.
a balancing, like a sort of a a balancing element.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, but it still sort of blows the mind,
Oh, for sure.
about its necessity if the fundamental focus is on the drama of redemption here on Earth with humans.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
um, and something that to play that out a little bit with something like Hinduism is, or even Buddhism as well, because there'll be parallels, is well, this would seemingly work in any type of civilization anywhere in
Hmm.
the universe, right? Because
Right, right.
it's fundamentally consciousness and
Yeah.
how, whereas seemingly, if you play that out, then I'm guessing Jesus would have to have gone to all of the different civilizations. Like there would have had to be some type of salvific incarnation wherever there's a civilization,
Hmm. Hmm.
something like that, which I guess would be possible, right?
Sure. That would be interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Compare the
exactly.
Bibles from the different galaxies.
Oh my goodness. So, um,
Well, I
so
guess you'd
yeah,
have your if you did have a Bible on different galaxies, you could Rosetta Stone to figure
yeah,
out if they have the same
precisely.
meaning.
Precisely. No, exactly. I mean, and also too, you'd look for themes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You're talking about Rosetta Stone in terms of translating.
yeah, to get their
Yeah,
language.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I would imagine even if it's not like Matthew, Mark, and Luke,
yeah. Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
Manny, Mo, and Jack, but it's still the same story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, so, sorry. So that keyed off of the Lord is enshrined in the hearts of all, and I was
Hmm.
sort of just teasing on that all,
Hmm.
um, and we discovered in the Smith book obviously that they believe in reincarnation,
Yeah,
and I believe reincarnation covers all life forms,
yeah. Hmm.
um, and
And I
it's
think
just that. Sure.
when we get to the Katha, it's talked about a little bit about different forms of evolution
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
death to
Hmm.
death in their
Yeah.
reincarnation. So I think, there it's not like super specific about what is
Right.
a
It's
lesser
a
form of evolution or previous
right.
form, or more primitive, but I think, it's implied that that applies to creatures and things. I don't even know, does it apply to inanimate things like rocks too? Like, did
I
those
don't think
reincarnate
so.
into animate? No?
Yeah. I don't. It's not my. I can't definitively say, but I would
Sure.
think not. I would think it would be like any type of life form, like
Hmm.
from a fruit fly all the way up to human.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see what they believe about artificial intelligence
Yeah,
in
I
terms of
do know. Actually,
reincarnation.
that would be interesting. I do know that, and I forget which book I got this from. There's a classic um, book called The Autobiography of a Yogi,
Mm.
and I'm not sure if it's in that one or if I just picked it up from reading various sources, but apparently in deep meditation, um, the practitioner will actually revisit their previous lives.
Oh,
So
sure.
they'll,
Hmm.
yeah. So like you go deep, 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 into the psyche to recover some of those.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so back to sort of the importance of meditation as a means of accessing a
Mm-hmm.
variety of truths, you know. So, but it's interesting because it shifts as I've been reading this and thinking about it. You know, like I look at the cat in a different way, and I look at the bearded dragon in a different way. Like I need to help you. Um,
How do you how does how do you fulfill the need, I don't know, what's the spiritual needs of
well, you know
creatures?
what? I actually think by just having them as pets, that's a big help.
Yeah. You think that
Don't you
yeah,
think? Right? In other words, you are providing
I guess, yeah.
you're providing care.
They have
Um,
more time to be safe,
oh my
then they
gosh,
can
exactly.
contemplate and go up a
Yeah.
level in
But
the next
also
life.
too, it's not like they're feral, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
You're actually cultivating relationship with them. I don't
Right.
know how you do that I don't know how you do that with the snake, but certainly you do that with the actually the cat does it with the snake at your place, right?
Kind of.
They converse,
They
you
do. They do.
know. Rejoice in him through renunciation, major theme in world religions. Actually, it's interesting. If you don't mind,
Hmm.
I don't know where that is. This was really interesting. I'll try to be quick about it.
Okay.
It's another. It's one of the readings I'm doing for my personal development.
Yeah.
The book on. I'm not finding it. Well, I might have to summarize it, but that guy was a little bit more succinct than I can be. Nope, cannot find it right now. So in Atomic Habits,
Hmm.
he ends up talking about this is on keying off of renunciation. He ends up he talks about uh, immediate gratification,
Yeah.
and there was this really interesting quote that um, from another author, and it was essentially saying that and it's a truism when you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, of course. But
Hmm.
when it comes to oh yeah, I'm sorry, immediate gratification is only interested in the present self, right? So
Mm.
I want this drink, I want this food, I want this sex or whatever. It's only interested in the present self. Delayed gratification is interested in the future self.
Hmm.
And so in other words, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to spend this money because I want to have this in the future, or I'm not I'm gonna bypass the drinking binge because I want to be healthier in the future, something like
Hmm.
that, or I
Hmm.
don't want to be hungover tomorrow
Yeah.
morning,
Yeah.
also future.
Hmm.
And and he basically makes this point that when you have the feeling, or in other words, if you have the desire to fulfill an immediate desire, that's probably a sign maybe you shouldn't. Like in other
Yeah.
words,
Yeah.
it's built in where if you are once you get the point, it's it makes you sort of pause and say, oh wait a minute, do it, or maybe you can ask a question as opposed to not just do it, but like, do I really want to do this right now?
Hmm. Hmm.
So even and that's not a religious book at all, right? This
Yeah.
is all about sort of like um, uh, you know abstaining for a better future you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was poignant when I read it. And as we talked about last time, it's interesting that renunciation that's universal in all religions. I just don't think there's one religion that says even Epicureanism, which is pleasure over pain. It's pleasure over pain, but in a wise way. right?
Right.
In other words, you don't want, if you overindulge the pleasure, then you are creating pain, right?
Right. And
Even in,
Epicureanism is more focused on like mental pleasure over physical pleasure, I
yes,
think.
yes,
So it's
exactly,
like it's
exactly.
very different than, oh, have the
Uh,
beer to feel good, you know?
Living a life of excess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just, I think that's, I don't know, it's just, um, I mean, just sort of like getting into it a little bit deeper. It's like, what does renunciation do? What does abstaining do? How does that, what does that do for the individual on their spiritual journey?
I feel like it gives you like control
Hmm.
or patience.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, we talked about the the drunken monkey stung by a bee doing Vesuvius's dance, and it's like if
Right,
that's
right.
the normal, if that's what's going on
Yeah.
in here, then
Yeah.
not just do like avoiding doing the dance or whatever,
Hmm.
um, is like control over yourself,
Hmm.
and like persistence. I don't know. I feel like it gets you to a state of calmness too, which is
Yeah,
important in meditation, um,
sure.
but also important in just having a clear mind to think about the right thing to do.
Yeah. Control makes sense, right? So that's
Hmm.
I mean, the takeaway is self-control. In other words, I
Hmm.
was able to say no to that. I was able to say no continually to that. I'm, uh, your fortitude, your strength
Hmm.
of will has increased. Patience makes sense as well. I mean, I would imagine, well, this comes up. Is that in this one about the senses, or is that in the
I'm on a
Katha?
call right now. Sorry.
It might be on the Katha.
Wait, say
I'm not
again?
sure. The one there was talk about the senses and that the senses, but I could be jumping to the third Upanishad. But it was like
Oh.
talking about the sort of the role of the senses, that the senses are just constantly seeking fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, here it is. Yeah, yeah.
In which one? Oh, you cut out, and we are back
Okay.
after a technical
Um,
issue.
there we go. What I was going to reference is on
Are you looking at?
page 81.
Oh, okay. Because
So I jumped to the Katha.
mhm.
I jumped
I
to the
also
Katha.
see page 84, and then I think 90
Yeah,
have mentions of the
reference to the
senses.
senses.
But yeah, go
Yeah.
for it.
On 81, he uses the um, image of a chariot, top of 81.
Hmm.
And it says, know the self as lord of the chariot, the body as the chariot itself, the discriminating intellect as the charioteer, and the mind as reins. The senses, say the wise, are the horses. Selfish desires are the roads. I'm sorry, senses are the horses. Jump down to 5. When a
Hmm.
person lacks discrimination and his mind is undisciplined, the senses run hither and thither like wild horses.
Hmm.
So the there's I you know there's sorry there's something about the senses that we are drawn to things, right? We are drawn to a pretty scene, a pretty woman. We are drawn towards light. um, you know,
Hmm.
and that in many ways, and also I guess what's key too, this if we don't have something in the middle that's moderating that, then right, sort of like wisdom, restraint, so on and
Yeah.
so forth,
Yeah.
prudence, all those lovely virtues, then the senses run wild,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? Or, if you will, the tail's wagging the dog. we are we're essentially becoming slaves to the senses by just following them wherever they go,
Hmm.
and and then in a sense maybe that ultimately is uh, weakening the will, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Well, it's like a
yeah,
tighter feedback loop because it's just like sense to action as opposed
yeah,
to sense to understanding or
right.
processing and then
Here's a good
thinking about the
example:
action.
the unenlightened dog that just literally hears you walking by their house. They can't even see you and starts to bark. Like that would be a great example,
Yeah.
right? They're not why, right?
Yeah.
But that's sense reaction and nothing
Hmm.
in the middle that says, nah, it's a dog. Well, we'll give them a break
Yeah.
this incarnation. But but there is something about that, right? Where the back to sort of renunciation, building up your willpower, um, uh, sorry, developing things like patience, deliberation, um, discriminating intellect. Do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this?
Hmm.
Um, and then I think also too, with all the different, well, I don't know about all of the traditions, but I know within the monastic tradition within Christianity, you're it's it cuts out a distraction, right? I don't own the monastery. I
Hmm.
don't even own the habit that I'm wearing. I live in a simple cell. That's what they call them, cells,
Yeah.
on a simple bed, and they eat simple food. Well, what is it? That frees up the mind, or the soul in this case, ultimately for dedication to God,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
Or in this case, within the Eastern tradition, now I'm not distracted. I can ultimately elevate my consciousness, elevate my consciousness to perceive and merge with, you
Hmm.
know, love Brahman. So it seems it's an interesting thing because it seems so counterintuitive to our makeup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our makeup is just driven like that tastes good, that looks good, that sounds good, that feels good.
Yeah.
And that's so much more immediate and then like, oh, crap, I gotta give this up, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, I don't know, if you grow up with candy, then you like
Yeah,
candy because you've tasted it,
yeah,
and so you'll want to
yeah,
have it. But if you never grew
yeah,
up with candy, then you never knew the senses that came with it, and
precisely,
so you don't
precisely.
know what you're missing out on. But like
Yeah, and
because you've experienced it, you want
you don't have
like
those neurological paths that
yeah.
are charged now each time you see it, smell it, taste it,
Hmm.
Um, so, and then what's interesting too, I sometimes say this, uh, just about related to this, like I have no, and actually this will be a good connection with Buddhism when we get to it, because they play up the role of suffering in their theory. That I do not suffer at all about not being an astronaut. I don't,
Hmm.
because I have no desire for it.
Right.
I think
Right.
it's cool, right?
Hmm.
So it's another, like I've never thought like it doesn't bother me, And you think about the things that bother you, usually there's some type of attachment to it, right?
Right.
So I'm going to be in a chess tournament today. Wish me
Hmm.
well.
Yeah.
Now I totally have an attachment to it,
Hmm.
right? And I want to do well, and so that ends up becoming the focus. So to connect to the renunciation, what I would imagine is that for uh, the Brahmin yogi or the Catholic monk, the desire is gone because so much time has lapsed where they haven't been feeding that particular desire.
Yeah. Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? In other words, and I would imagine there's a neurological basis for that as well, right? The neurons that fire together wire together. So now they're not firing together,
Hmm.
they're not wiring together, you know? So,
Yeah, it always, whenever I think about that, it always makes me wonder, but I can kind of connect it to like social media, where
yeah,
it's like when you're on social media, you have all this, I don't know, there's all these senses,
Stimuli. Yeah.
stimulation from what people are doing, and usually it's like the highlights of their life and whatnot.
Right.
And I was on, like, for example, Instagram throughout high school and college, and I had thought about, like, I was like, do I really need this in my life? Like, I'm on it every single
Yeah.
morning. It takes up like an hour or more of my day just scrolling through
Yeah.
stuff. And I was like, but what am I giving up? It's like if I
Yeah.
get like, I don't know, it's like this when you're in that state, when you're there with the senses, it is
Yeah.
so hard
Yeah.
to be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna not do that. Because it's like
Sure.
there's something
Sure.
that's like clawing, like
Yeah.
you want it or you need it. But like, I deleted Instagram it
Years
I don't
ago,
know,
actually,
years ago. Yeah,
you were way ahead of me.
a
You know.
couple, like, yeah, I think a year or two into university, and like I'll still look at it occasionally on my computer
Right.
browser like once a month or every other month,
Sure.
but it's
Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah.
not there every single day. It's not an hour of my day. And
Hmm.
it was a little hard at first, but then honestly, after a while, it's like
You don't
just
miss
it
it.
doesn't I don't miss it at all. And so I don't
Right.
know, it makes me wonder how many things in life are like that. Like, do you need
Yeah.
to have this meal or this
Yep.
candy or
Yep.
this ice cream,
Yep.
or do you need to
Yeah.
have this subscription to this service, or I don't know,
Totally.
buy things on Amazon versus like
Yeah.
go somewhere? It's like there's all of these things, and it's like you feel
Yeah.
like you need it, but
Yeah.
if you actually didn't pursue those things, it probably
Hmm.
wouldn't, you'd probably feel fine.
No, you're absolutely right. I did something. I was so your Instagram pronunciation is further ahead of mine, but I've I've deleted the app. Obviously, all the content's still there, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And and so I've deleted the app. I think it was like two. It was like two skiing trips ago. I did post for the last skiing trip, but two skiing trips. I had the pictures, I had the videos, didn't even load them, and we had a fun time, right? But and it's the same thing, and I actually also attribute it to because I'm 50, 51, attribute it to like getting older. So if I'm actually away from something for a shorter period of time, I'm like, I've just forgotten about it, right? Like sort of like old man brain, which by the
Sure.
way, I'll accept that. Like I'll look
Hmm.
at it like that seems to be a positive then, because I don't think about
Yeah.
it at all. I don't think about it at all, you know. So
Hmm.
same
Hmm.
thing. Yeah, I think it's the same thing. And you're basically then freeing up space to, well, endeavor in new projects and use your time in a different way. And in
Hmm.
this case, you know, more time to meditate, more time to read sacred scriptures, to sit at the knee of the sage, and ultimately become enlightened.
Yeah.
Um, and I think too, and this comes up with oh man, his name, I had it down. Nashikita. The
Hmm.
CH I think is soft, as I've heard it in different sorry, online.
Okay.
Nashikita in the Katha. Um, I mean, he even says it too. He's like, all of these things are transient, right?
Hmm.
When Yama wants to give him the three boons or the three wishes, Yama's thinking it's all going to be material stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because that's typically human beings want. But it's all passing. Or connect this to a conversation that Dietrich, and I had with Augustine on the road,
Hmm.
that there is a true. I'm sorry. There's a basic logic in focusing on an infinite good as opposed to a finite good, regardless of whether or not infinite goods exist.
Sure.
It's just you'd want to focus on an infinite good as opposed to a finite good by default.
Yeah.
It's infinite. It's going to continue to uh, it's going to continue to provide good.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like
Just
even if it is delayed
simply
but
put,
infinite, it's the
yeah,
area under the curve
you
is bigger than the area under
yeah,
curve of a finite thing.
right,
Yeah.
right. You want that thing,
Hmm.
So um, so it's sort of interesting in terms of like whittling away, like what can be whittled away. I mean, I know you're doing this. We've talked about it with you, the carbon footprint, right? It's like
Hmm.
what can be whittled away, what can be cut down. Now, obviously, that's for a good ethical reason,
Hmm.
but I would say it's also that helps psychologically, right? That helps. monetarily,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm.
Just sort of an example, uh, I've been doing far more vegetarian meals. I mean,
Hmm.
maybe I'll use like chicken stock or beef stock, but still, that's cheap. And I thought about it. I was like, at some level, your stomach is going to send a signal to your brain that it's full. So
Hmm.
what the heck does it matter if it's meat? It could just be parsnips and potatoes, and broccoli. That's and then I've been like I think this week we're doing only three. I meal plan for the week. Only three meals that have meat,
Hmm.
and that includes, by the way, lunches on the weekends I cover as well, right?
Hmm.
So it goes all the way. So that's pretty good. So it's sort of like a whittling away that ultimately one makes you think about why am I eating X, and then two, like it's frugal,
Yeah.
right? Because meat's
Yeah.
expensive, especially red meat. So I think all of these things are like, but it does make me think like, like, what else can we whittle away?
Hmm.
What other distractions? I'm not going to get rid of the kids, but what are the other distractions? You know, um, and maybe not even just for spiritual reasons, but even just in terms of like a simple Zen. I want. There's minimalism is good for the head.
Hmm. The simple life.
At
Yeah.
minimum, at minimum. You know. So I'm sorry, renunciation.
Yeah.
That was our renunciation riff.
Um,
A lot on the self I'm seeing
yeah, I was gonna
in
say
the
there's a
Isho.
lot on the self and a lot on kind of
Can I
this
just hit some of them and then we can
juxtaposition.
talk about it?
Yeah.
Those who deny the self are born again, blind to self, enveloped in darkness, utterly devoid of love for God. The self is one, ever still. The self is swifter than thought, swifter than the senses. Though motionless, he outruns all pursuit. Without the self, never could life exist. The self seems to move, but is ever still. He seems far away, but is ever near. He is within all and transcends all. Self is everywhere. Bright is the self.
Yeah. A lot of like juxtapositions where or what seem to be contradictions but um
Hmm.
might not be.
Right,
Um,
right. Real quickly at the end, and then I'll
mhm.
be quiet. And or almost toward the end. Um, So when you talk about the sun, oh nourishing sun, solitary traveler, controller, source of life for all creatures, spread your light and subdue your dazzling splendor, so that I may see your blessed self. Even that very self am I. Right, I'll be
Mhm.
quiet.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean I think you see all these juxtapositions, but then part of the other theme is that the self is everything. Um,
Hmm.
and so that, you're seeing the sun is the same self that I am. And in
Hmm.
the text you'll notice at least in our English translation,
Hmm.
all of instances of self are capitalized, even if they're in the
Yeah,
center of a sentence. And so
yeah,
it's not just like talking about the person who wrote it
right,
or me, but
right.
it's really this bigger
Oneself.
concept. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I think we had. I'm just going back to some of the definitions that I remember I wrote down definitions of. Oh yeah, being itself. So I think you can actually sort of just to help sort of give it more of a robust, uh, colorful understanding of it. So, being itself, the infinite, the
Hmm.
eternal, ultimate consciousness, the transcendental state,
Hmm.
right? Sort of, I guess, would be the ground of being.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think that makes sense for all the contradictions because it's like, well, if you're talking about consciousness, it can move fast and slow.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yes.
it can, yeah, move but be still.
Hmm.
Um, it can be everywhere but in one place because it's like it's talking about this ground of well-being
Hmm.
essentially, which is everywhere, but then also
Hmm.
it's in you, which is one
Yeah.
thing, or in the sun. Um, yeah.
It's interesting though. It really does. Back on 57, I think at base it is motionless because
Mm-hmm.
it's swifter than thought. It's swifter than the senses, though motionless. So that seems to be like a main claim. He outruns all pursuit, which might be more a poetic point that's being
Mm-hmm.
made.
Mm-hmm.
Without the self, not life, never could life exist. The self seems to move, but is ever still. Um, he is within all, and he transcends all. Yeah, you totally have that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that sort of seeming contradiction, which in Eastern philosophy there's a little bit more comfortability with. Um, we'll see this with the Tao Te Ching, or totally with the whole yin and yang element.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of like it is and it isn't. Peace. Um, I mean, it's I said at the outset that the Upanishads are about in part about consciousness, and I think we're right back at it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Seems far
and
away, but is ever near. It's interesting.
It's interesting too because it seems like, I mean, um, obviously it can move quickly, right? My consciousness right now is thinking about Germany. My body is in, the United States, but my consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
boom, right, right there, that fast, split second.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm curious whether or not, in the experience of these yogis, there is like what does that stillness mean? You know, like what does obviously with meditation, um, and we talked about it before, right? From the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the first one is essentially yoga is the art of stilling the mind, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, that's more the individual mind to see clearly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm stilling the mind that I'm not thinking about yesterday and the future, the ache in my back, right? I'm stilling it, and now I'm maybe right, I'm sort of clearing my mind, and now I can see things more clearly. But also, like, what does it mean? Like, if it is the case that ultimate consciousness that we're all a part of is still
Mm.
what, like, like, do you, is that something they ultimately access through deep meditation? You know?
Yeah, I would say so. Probably, like, I don't know. It.
Yeah.
I feel like we can only go so far from our own experience, but if you just think about all the things your mind is doing most of the
Yeah.
time, there are so
By the
many.
way, did you meditate?
I did. Mm-hmm.
I did too, and I I'm sure you noticed, because I did a straight half hour, and I
Mm-hmm.
actually did it in the early morning, so it was all dark. It actually helped,
Okay.
and with
I did
eyes
it.
closed.
I did it in the evening, which I think was a mistake because
Yeah,
I was already a little tired.
got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But maybe not a bad way to like transition into sleep, right?
No, it was
But
pretty good.
my
Yeah, yeah.
gosh, man, the mind was going,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah.
I
Um,
mean, the way I was able to ultimately slow it down was I was consciously I was breathing in and out of my mouth, and
mhm,
I was creating a little bit of noise with my breath so
mm,
that the mind could just go right to the breath.
mhm,
Then I realized I was sort of not really in control of my breath. And then I took more control because I think if you recall when they talked about Raja Yoga, they they actually try to suspend the breath.
yeah.
They get
So that
to
you
a point
cannot
where they're
tell
like they're holding it exactly,
if it's going in
right? Where
or
you
out.
couldn't
Yeah.
even blow out a candle, I think the image
Yeah.
was, right?
Mhm,
Um, and so that's I would say that's where I was like, okay, keep on focusing on that. Random thought, random thought, random thought, random thought. Keep on focusing on the breath. Um, Posture I know is important too, and I probably didn't have. I was leaning sort of against the couch because I was um, stumbling in the morning to try to find a spot. Um, but that would be the closest I sort of got, sort of like where I was able to focus on the breath
mhm,
and control the breath and slow it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, but even then, I think in that pursuit, even if you did notice that there were so many thoughts, I would say that it was a lot less than when you're not meditating, when you're
Yeah.
just in your day, right? And it's just things are just going and
Yes.
happening. Like you're not even
Yes.
aware of them.
Yeah.
So you can't
Yeah. Yeah.
separate them and see the space in between the thoughts. And so it's
Yeah.
like I feel like if you kind of take that to extrapolate that to the extreme, then a yogi
Mhm.
who's profound at meditation, who's
Oh my
approaching,
gosh.
you know, the self,
Yeah.
um, is just at peace. Like it's just bliss,
Hmm.
right? And so it's like maybe like
Hmm.
it is
Hmm.
totally still maybe when they reach that point, but um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I don't know I don't remember where
I
I
guess it
heard
would.
this or saw this, but
Oh yeah.
the it's like you gain more time by time moving slower, essentially.
Hmm.
So if
Hmm.
you are
Yep.
able
Yep.
to slow down and meditate, then
Yeah.
you can make so much more
You
use of the time
or
than
you'd
if
have
you're
a
just
longer
in it.
life.
Essentially, yeah, perceived longer,
Yeah.
maybe actually longer. Yeah,
Yeah. No, if you're rushing around the house, time's slipping by, right?
yeah,
You're rushing around
hmm
the house, you're cleaning. I mean, I think about it like I got to clean before someone comes, and I've
hmm
pushed it off to the last hour. That last hour feels like 5 minutes.
yeah.
You know, I will say this: the 30 minutes felt a little short. I was sort of, for me,
Yeah,
I because I set an alarm,
hmm
and then I sat down, and I sat and meditated, but I could not do full or even partial lotus, man. I had to do crisscross applesauce, and
yeah. Oh no, yeah.
I was like, I had a couple moments where I was like, I wonder where we are in the time, but my eyes were closed the whole time, and then the alarm went off at one point. I mean, it wasn't short, but I was like, I felt like I maybe had about 10 more minutes. Yeah.
That's exactly what I felt. So I actually did a guided meditation by a
Oh,
Hindu yogi.
oh,
Um,
cool. Oh,
yeah,
that's cool.
and so maybe I'll put the link in the description.
Yeah, put the link
Um,
and share it with me. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so he was actually speaking in probably Hindi and then both in Hindi and English. So he kind of went back and forth to
Love it.
explain because he was in front of an audience. Um,
Yeah.
and like there wasn't talking throughout the whole thing. It was kind of like at the beginning, and then
Hmm.
like every now and then he would say something about like just try to refocus on your breath and whatnot. And then he
Sure.
had like this kind of end segment. Um, but yeah, no, I was there and I felt like I was like, all right, I feel like, we're still in the middle of it, like there's still probably
Yeah,
10
yeah.
minutes left. Like we've probably done 20 and then it's like, all right, now it's like time to do the final Om and then you end it out. And then I was like, okay, there you go. So
That's excellent.
it did go a little faster than I thought.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. But you're probably back to your point about, um, I guess maybe here's the point. Obviously, our consciousness moves. So let's say within the Atman, right? Our
Hmm.
consciousness is moving, and just simply from thought to thought, we can say,
Yeah.
you're right. Um, but we can still it, and
Yeah.
maybe right. I mean, that's possible. Like like you were saying, I'm sure the random thoughts were less than they
Hmm.
were in a waking on a non-meditative state. Totally true. So you just continue to work that spectrum,
Hmm.
right, down toward the meditative one. It probably is one of total calm, and with that type of training, no movement. You know.
I would
So
also say,
maybe if I could say
mhm,
this, hold your thought
yeah.
before I forget. It could be the case that within ultimate consciousness, it is still.
Hmm.
It is still, and in its stillness, it is peaceful and it is blissful. In the Atman consciousness, yes, we are connected to the ultimate, but in the Atman consciousness, that's where
There's
there's movement,
perturbations. Yeah, turbulence.
perturbations, even better,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah, I was gonna say also we're kind of looking at it from was it the Raja yoga perspective, where
Yoga.
it's like you are
Hmm.
meditating, but I think it
Yeah.
equally applies to I don't actually remember the other names of the
The
other ones
other
right now,
yogas.
but the other yogas where, for
You,
example, The one
Yana,
Yana,
Bhakti,
oh yeah,
and
Bhakti.
Karma.
So for
And Karma
example,
Yoga is
karma
all about
yoga,
work.
yeah, which is all about work, if you are fully dedicated to your task, you are not
No,
thinking
you're
about
not.
anything else, right? You're on a
Yeah,
single stream of consciousness. You're in like a flow state of
yeah.
whatever you're doing, if you're a mechanic or plumber or
No, that's a good
chef
point.
or whatever. It's just you are there. And so it's like these random thoughts aren't coming about. So I feel like,
Right.
that's like to just show the parallel of like this is how you can both paths can have this streamline towards like no
I
thought
think
or single
that's
thought
beautiful.
stillness. Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. You're absolutely right. I mean, you could do that with the yana, and the yana yoga is more intellectual, and
Hmm.
so you could be entirely focused. You think about the quintessential scholar at work,
Hmm.
immersed in the work,
Yeah.
no random thoughts, let's say.
Hmm.
Um, and then love, right?
Yep.
The bhakti yogi, or yoga, same thing. I mean, love obviously, you know, is, well, I'll use the word from the Kapha yoga, I think, right? One pointed,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So I think you're absolutely right. And to do a little comparison and connection, an absolute truth within Zen Buddhism that you have, because what Zen Buddhism is going to do is basically take all of this and minimalize it to ultimate concentration.
Hmm.
So we're not going to have, there's not going to be God talks of gods and afterlife and so on and so forth. It's just literally just stripping it down to focus. And that would be true for the seemingly for the Zen Buddhist monk, not just when meditating, but also when the classic image is washing out your rice bowl,
Mm.
right? So after you've had your rice, total concentration on washing that out. Total concentration on chores in the monastery. Total concentration
Right.
on alms, begging for alms, right? Which is all part of their activity.
Hmm.
So I think that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Hmm.
You know, um, which is which actually, if you want to do a reverse engineering, what the fuck happened? So
Wait, what do
why
you
is
mean?
it the case? Well, in other words, if we can get to that state, why are we not in that state? What we and I'm saying you could do a genealogy ultimately back to infancy.
Hmm.
What is it? What is it about? Um, Either the kind of thing that were
Hmm.
at that phase, into toddlerhood, into preteen, into teens, so on and so forth, into adulthood. Um, that creates the monkey mind, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's a good
I mean,
question.
I guess the reverse engineer would be, or reversing it would be something along the lines of, without using the spirituality of
Hmm.
it, um, that the infant, the infant, the infant is a slave to his senses.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I
kind of
mean, like,
true,
I'm
right? Like,
uncomfortable in this diaper.
well, yeah, yeah.
Am I hungry? I need mommy.
Hmm.
So and therefore, although I do think there's actually something that is enlightened because they don't have language to sort of mess with things.
Yeah,
you
or
know,
long-term
uh,
memory, really. Like, I mean,
yeah, yeah,
in the same
yeah.
sense that we can
Um,
remember yesterday.
and then and then toddlerhood is, I want fights, whatever. I guess you could sort of say that, or if you want to do the reincarnation theories, that guess what, you died with a monkey mind, you're getting it right back. You need to work it out in this incarnation, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like the first thing you do in the world is explore it through your senses. And so
Yeah,
you have to
which, by the
learn
way,
what
a
your senses are
beautiful
doing.
thing,
Hmm.
right? Because you're right, exactly. You're like, what is that? What are those two little holes in the wall that I want to, put my fingers in?
Yeah. And
um,
then,
so
I don't
let's
know, I feel like you kind of have a progression from childhood, infancy and childhood, where it's all senses, and then
Hmm.
you're kind of building a sense of self versus other, and so
Hmm.
you're building ego immediately, essentially, right? Especially
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
parents who, there's like things you're supposed to do, things you're not supposed to do.
Yep.
Like you kind of build this sense of
Gosh.
like, oh, like this is
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
like, this is right for me, this is not
yeah.
right for me. This is like you have this perceived like perception of
Piaget,
how they see you. Yeah, mm-hmm.
you know
Piaget
Piaget?
and
Yeah. Yeah.
Erkinson's.
Piaget was saying that in the earliest phases, so infancy, the child is entirely egocentric.
Mhm.
And by the way, that's not a negative. That's descriptive.
Yeah. Oh
Meaning,
yeah.
in other words, in a sense, they're not solipsistic. They're egocentrics. They're not,
Mhm.
they believe other people exist, but everything is about them. And why not? You are only ever thinking from, I have the ability now to be like, oh, or not even just now, but as one gets older, like, oh, Christian has his own thoughts. That's
Mhm.
right. Cool. He probably has his own concerns too, needs, wants, etc.
Mhm.
That's not happening in an infant, right?
Yeah.
It's
Well.
literally metaphysically about me.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't it? I'm looking at it all from my perspective,
Mhm.
right?
And you can't understand others without having gone through that, right? Because you
Yeah,
have like you
yeah,
understand others by understanding yourself.
yeah. And by getting language, then, slowly over time, then you're able to communicate, you clearly communicate. And in that communication, then I'm able to get some insight into your mind,
Mhm.
into yourself, right? Which enables me to bridge or escape an egocentric predicament.
Yeah. And actually, to tie
As it
this
were.
back to the Isha Upanishad, I think
Hmm.
in verses 6 and 7, it talks about, it says, those who see all creatures in themselves and themselves in all creatures know no
Well
fear.
done.
Those who see all creatures in themselves and themselves in all creatures know no grief.
Yep.
How can the multiplicity of life delude the one who sees its unity? And I feel like
Ah,
that's awesome because it's like, we're talking about like the ego of a child and then being able to see the egos of others. And it's
yep.
like once you actually understand how others or other creatures operate and you actually see the
Hmm.
similarities between them and yourself, then you're like, I don't know, it's a sense of like love or like
Yeah.
this total understanding. Like you can't hate it or you can't fear it
Yeah.
because it's like
Yes.
you resonate with it. And this is actually
Actually, what's
something
interesting.
that
Yeah.
comes up in the book and movie Ender's Game, which I find is really
Hmm.
interesting, where it's like um, it's talking about how you approach your enemy, and it's like you need to know more and more about your enemy so that you can like defend yourself or get a one
Yes.
up against it. But then to a certain point, you know your enemy so well that you cannot hate it because you understand how it is working and why it is doing what it's
Right,
doing, and it's
right,
just like
right, right, right,
you have no choice but to
right.
like have
Yes,
sympathy.
exactly. Yes, exactly. I understand you.
Yeah.
I know you.
Hmm.
You know, and then that's funny. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was thinking too as you were talking. Is similar to um, a parental relationship because parents, let's say the default, it's not true with all parents, but the default is to love their offspring,
Hmm.
right? Um, and because they are not just because you're taking care of them, it's your job to do that. They're an extension of you,
Hmm.
right? They're an extension of you. And I'm sort of playing with the metaphysical unity element here, So because they're an extension of you, there's extra care for that individual, for an offspring than there is sort of for a random child in the neighborhood, right?
Sure.
But to cultivate that even further, you know, um, goodness, to love your neighbor as yourself, right? Um, that's a world changer right there, you know.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I said this to you before, but a rabbi once sort of summarized the essence of Judaism. He was asked, And he summarized it, and he was like, "Love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. Everything else is commentary."
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the hardest thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
given sort of this egocentric predicament, you know.
Yeah.
And I would even say it's hard after you become aware, not enlightened,
Oh,
but aware,
sure.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like you're more aware. We're both more aware than we were as infants, right? But even that is hard to do, you know.
Yeah.
And but what's interesting is that you that within Hinduism and these Upanishads, you have a metaphysical reason to do it
Mm-hmm.
because you both are the same self.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Katha,
Katha. Yeah, we're like I mean, um
or should we pause,
I think
Christian?
we should probably
Why don't
pause. We
why don't
could
why don't we pause? Yeah.
okay.
No, let's pause. I think you're right.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Let's pause and then we'll continue with the Katha. And I know how to pronounce it. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, I gotta look it up in my notes. Brihadaranyaka. That's the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Brihadaranyaka. I had to look that one up, man. I was like, come on.
Nyanka, Haranyanka,
Brihadara.
Dada,
It's what's there.
Arayanka. Yeah. Hadaranka,
Brihadaraniyaka.
Brihadaranka. Mm-hmm. Brihadaranka.
I think it's Niaka.
Nyanka,
Brihadaranyaka.
Nyaka.
Niyaka.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where the accent is. I've always had trouble with that.
I'll have to
So,
look at the transliteration
here
or
we
the.
go. Here we go. I know this is awkward because we're just sort of chatting here at the end. Um, but if you go real quickly as a closer,
Mm-hmm.
goodness gracious, this introduction's long enough. Um,
For which?
oh, okay, here we go. Here we go. Ready? Go to page 59.
59.
See the bottom of 59?
Yeah.
So this will be our closer.
Mm.
You ready? You see the last line?
Yeah.
Can you vocalize that in three,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
two, one?
Om
Om
Shanti
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 Shanti.
Shanti. Namaste.
Namaste.